Anybody recognize this sign? Planet Fitness, they have what they call the judgment-free zone. And so right now for the next 90 minutes, it's a judgment-free zone. So we're going to talk about nutrition and some simple things that you can do if you want to improve your outlook in terms of aging in a healthy way. This applies whether you're young or old. It's never too late to get started. A lot of times patients ask us in our office, am I too old? Can you still help me? And I say, as long as you're still breathing, then we can probably still help you. So, in the 90s, everybody remember this? Mm-hmm. The food pyramid from the government. What was the foundation of the pyramid?
Carbs.
Yes, sir. Carbs, bread, cereal, rice, and pasta was thought to be the foundation of your nutrition.
6 to 11 servings.
6 to 11 servings. And what do they have at the top? Fats, oils, sweets, and banana pudding. Fats and oils and sweets. And so obviously as the pyramid goes up, you're supposed to eat fewer of those things towards the top of the pyramid. And as research has come out over the last couple of decades, what we've realized is that some of the things actually need to be reversed. Sweets are really still at the top, but there are a good category of fats and oils that are actually extremely helpful and promote good health, and we'll get into that. And so this is a more recent version of the pyramid. And you'll see at the bottom, they've actually put diet, exercise, and weight control, which does need to be on the foundation, but that's not nutrition. But when you see at the bottom, they do have some grains, which would be carbohydrates, but they're whole grains. And then healthy fats and oils at the foundation, and then vegetables and fruits as well. And when you look at comparing kind of how it was before, they didn't even separate out fats and oils. They just thought everything was bad when it comes to fat. And what that led to in the 90s in particular was the low-fat diet. Everybody remember the low-fat? Low-fat cupcakes, low-fat this, low-fat cookies. And what did they substitute for the fat? Sugar. They had to make it taste good, so they put sugar in there instead. Mm-hmm. What happened to the incidence of diabetes and obesity since that time? Has it gotten better or worse? It's gotten worse. So we substituted sugar for fat, and our health overall has gotten worse since that time. All right, so the 5 do's and don'ts, simple things that we can do. Avoid added sugar, reduce or eliminate processed carbohydrates, increase the colors of the rainbow, and that does not mean Skittles, whoever was thinking that. Emphasize healthy fats and proteins, and then supplement what you can't get through food. So I want to give you a little bit of background information that will help understand a little bit better why some of these, why the first 2 are important, the don'ts. Anybody know what inflammation is? Except for the doctors.
Swelling.
Swelling is part of it, absolutely. Why do we have inflammation? What causes it? Fluid retention is part of it. Salt can cause it, yeah. But inflammation is actually a natural process that happens as part of healing. Who's ever skinned their knee before? This morning? So when you skin your knee, what happens? It's red. It gets red, swelling, painful, irritated. If you were to measure the temperature in that area, it'd actually be warmer in that area than it is on the surface in other areas. And so inflammation, it has all those characteristics, but it's designed to help the healing process. So that process of getting painful and swelling and irritated, what's happening is your body is sending chemicals and components to the scrape on your knee to help start the healing process. And at first it starts to clot up, and eventually new skin gets laid down, and then a month or so later, then you have a little bit of a scar, but it's all healed and it's closed up. And if you were to look at the knee after it's healed, is it still red, swollen, irritated, and painful? No, because the inflammation has gone away. So inflammation is a normal part of the healthy healing process, but what happens is if inflammation stays and it doesn't go away, then it can actually be damaging to your tissues. And so it's chronic inflammation that we have to worry about. And chronic inflammation, ongoing, chronic just means it's ongoing for a long time. Chronic inflammation is really at the root of most chronic health disease conditions. So things like arthritis, it's ultimately an inflammatory condition, so pain in the joints. Diabetes is an inflammatory condition. Autoimmune diseases like Hashimoto's hypothyroidism is an inflammatory condition. Even cognitive issues like Alzheimer's are associated with inflammation. So if all of our diseases are associated with inflammation, then we have to look at inflammation. What's the source of inflammation? So what do you think is the #1 source of inflammation for the average American?
Sugar.
Sugar. But more broadly is what we eat, right? It's our food. Right here. Source of inflammation. Not picking on this in general.
I know.
In specific. But in general, the food that we eat. I'll pick on that later.
Yeah.
In general, the food that we eat is the greatest source of inflammation. And so if we want to have any impact on chronic disease, then we have to look at the root cause. And that's what I've been preaching since I opened my practice 2 blocks away 8 years ago, is #1, getting to the root cause. And for most chronic diseases, inflammation is involved in that. And so the first thing that we have to do is address where that inflammation is coming from, and that's coming from our food. And so that's why we use food as medicine in our office. That's the first line of defense. So now that we know a little bit more about inflammation, let's talk about these things in a little bit more detail. So avoiding added sugar. Sugar has been linked to diabetes, obesity, cancer, and the reason why it has become so prevalent is because it's actually addictive. Did you know that sugar stimulates the same areas of your brain that heroin and cocaine do? This is why it's so difficult for everyone to go sugar-free or even reduce sugars, because then you have cravings. And the food industry knows this, and they're in the business to make money and to sell you sugary products, and so they keep those things in there to make sure that you come back. And it's not, ultimately, a lot of the things that they put the sugar in are not satiating either, meaning they don't absolve your hunger, they don't take care of the fact that you're hungry. It actually makes you more hungry. Great example of that is I typically fast breakfast. I don't eat breakfast, which was a new thing for me within the last year, because I was usually one of those people who needs to constantly eat, or else I would get what people call me hangry. So angry because you're hungry, right? Some of you know what I'm talking about. And so I never thought, well, I can't go that long without eating. But what I've found is that fasting, first of all, was used to treat type 1 diabetes and epilepsy before insulin was discovered and before anti-epileptic medications were invented. So it's a valid medical treatment. But the fasting, what I've noticed since I do that is that if I eat breakfast, I'm actually more hungry before I get to lunch than if I don't eat breakfast and haven't eaten since the night before. So when we look at sugar, we have to realize that, I can get up here and say avoid added sugar, but it's not as easy as it sounds, because it does have that addictive component to it. But sugar is a big source, as you mentioned, of inflammation. And what does inflammation lead to? And that's a lot of the chronic diseases that can contribute to. So things like hypertension, migraines, cardiovascular disease, obesity, diabetes. One of the things my dad dealt with last year is he had a quadruple bypass surgery. And so his arteries were clogged. And he has a sweet tooth. And he ate lots of cookies and candies and cakes and drank chocolate milk all the time. It was going out of style. And he would never admit it, but he had diabetes. I finally had it proven to me when I went to the hospital and looked at his medication list, and he was on metformin, which is for diabetes, but he would never admit that he was actually diabetic, despite my prodding and all that. So ultimately, what caused his arteries to clog was not fat. What caused his arteries to clog, yes, there may have been cholesterol and fat that was physically blocking the artery, but what caused that cholesterol and fat to attach to the artery is inflammation. It's inflammation on the arterial walls that causes that buildup to occur. So cholesterol gets attention because that's the physical component that's blocking the artery, but it's not actually what's starting that whole process to begin with. So if we kind of back it up and are looking at the root cause, it comes back to inflammation. So why is sugar bad for you? Heart disease, diabetes, obesity, weakened immune system, tooth decay. dentists. And in the literature, since about 2008 in the medical literature, they have been talking about Alzheimer's disease as type 3 diabetes because there's a huge connection between the blood sugar dysregulation, the inflammation that's associated with that, and the development of cognitive decline. Okay, so what's the quickest way that you can reduce your sugar intake? What do you think is probably one of the biggest sources of sugar for Drinks, you got it. If you just cut out sugary beverages and you did that consistently, the most immediate thing you would probably notice is weight loss because those calories are empty. They're not nutritional for you at all. They don't provide any nutritional benefits. All they do is increase your caloric intake, which if you don't burn off, then it gets stored as fats, and then of course it drives the inflammation and everything else. So it's not just soda. Of course, in the younger generation, it's Starbucks is making a killing off of this. And so while coffee is actually a great source of antioxidants, when it's masked mostly with sugary syrups, it's not really the same thing. Okay, so that's the first thing, sugar. And then the second is to reduce or eliminate processed carbohydrates. So this is an example of some processed carbohydrates. So cookies, cakes, candies, chips, pretzels, all that stuff. Simple carbohydrates. This is also simple carbohydrates, pastas. What does this turn into? Is sugar. Simple carbohydrates, almost immediately, as soon as you put them in your mouth, they turn into sugar. And you can do this experiment when you go home, or if you can grab one of these rolls and do it. If you take a piece of bread and you just put it in your mouth and leave it there for about a minute, you will notice it will start to taste sweet. And the reason why is because the carbohydrates in the bread are literally being broken down by the enzymes in your mouth into simple sugar, glucose. And so you start to taste that sweetness. And so obviously if it's happening in your mouth, that happens as soon as it gets into your stomach, small intestine, it gets absorbed, and then your blood sugar spikes. And so when you look at these things, I want you to think about them in the same way as we talked about just regular old sugar, because that's effectively what it becomes for your body. Again, why is sugar bad for you? So it's not just the candies and the cakes and the cookies, it's also the simple carbohydrates. Okay, so what are some, I can email this to you guys. I should have put it on the sheet, but I can email it, Dave, if you want to send it out. These are just some simple ways that you can swap out some snacks, healthy snacks, in place of some of the more sugary type things. So a green tart Granny Smith apple with almond or cashew butter. So whenever you have a little bit of sweetness, for example, with the apple, you want to combine that with some fat and protein, because the fat and protein will slow down the absorption of the sugar, and it won't spike, and therefore it won't crash, and so it won't contribute to energy swings. How many people after you've eaten this lunch today feel more energy? Raise your hand after eating lunch today. Nobody has more energy? How many of you feel more fatigued? Okay, so if you feel anything other than not hungry anymore after eating, then there's a problem. So if you feel more energy or less energy, you have a blood sugar regulation problem. If you have less energy, those of you that raised your hand for that, it means your blood sugars had spiked and you're starting to crash. And then if you have constipation, diarrhea, any gut problems, obviously that's not normal either. So the only thing that should happen after you eat is that you're not hungry. If any other thing happens, then there's something not going on correct. So anyway, if you're eating some sweets, put some healthy fats and proteins with it. It'll help with the absorption so you don't get a spike and a crash. Coconut-based yogurt is very high in healthy fat and protein. Nuts and seeds, lots of good healthy proteins and fats. That also can help kind of with roughage in the gut. If you have like diverticulitis, they tell you no nuts and seeds, but you can do the butters. Raw veggies with guacamole, olives, beef jerky, nitrate-free. I'll show you a picture of that in a second. I don't think Steve makes beef jerky, but you could bake your own with his meat. Nitrate-free, nitrates are a preservative, and they can cause, for people with headaches, it could be a cause of headaches or migraines. It can affect neurological function as well. And all those nitrate-laden meats have been linked to increased risk for colon cancer. So when they talk about don't eat salami and pepperoni, it's all the ones that have nitrates in them. So if you get the ones without the nitrates, they don't have that same risk factor associated with them. You can just eat the almond or cashew butter by itself. Trail mix without the junk, so like no M&Ms in the trail mix. And then dark chocolate. Chocolate is actually similar to coffee, both coming from tropical beans. And so they're a very rich source of antioxidants. The darker you get it, the less sugar it has in it, so that you don't have to worry about the crash or the spike in the crash. So here's an example of some olives. They make olives in little snack packs, so you can take them with you. And here's an example. This is an organic grass-fed beef stick, so everybody thinks of, what are they called?
Slim Jims.
Slim Jims. No, don't eat those. But these have grass-fed, healthy, and I'll talk about the difference between grass-fed and not in a minute, but those are convenient snacks. And then this is a coconut yogurt that you see how much protein is in there. There's 10 grams of protein, and they don't show the fat because people don't like to see how much fat is in there because we've all been trained to think that fat makes us fat, but it doesn't. In any case, it's got a high amount of fat in there too, so this would help you. This would be a great snack to help you not be hungry. And it does have some sugar, but that gets masked because you're eating it with the fat protein. Okay, number 3, increase the rainbow. So that's the don'ts. Now we'll focus on what you should do. So the more color you get, the more nutrients you get that are helpful. And these are called phytonutrients because they come from plants. These are things that help provide antioxidants and anti-inflammatory benefits, and there's thousands of different categories of them. You've probably heard of carotenoids. They help with eye function and immune health. Resveratrol, you've probably heard of that. It's in wine. You can't drink enough wine to get an effective dose, so don't try that. You do have to supplement that separately. So this helps with cardiovascular and cognitive health. Flavonoids are antioxidant, anti-cancer. Glucosinolates reduce inflammation, help with stress response, and so all of these things are found in your fruits and vegetables. And if you're able to tolerate them raw, you'll have a better, they survive better if they're raw fruits and vegetables, but you'll still get them if they're cooked. They're just not as potent as they would be otherwise. And a lot of people, they just don't like the taste of fruits and vegetables, especially vegetables, because they don't have sugar, and we're all addicted to sugar. But one of the things that you can do, and I used to be one of them people, and I still don't eat every vegetable, but one of the ways we were talking about kale, somebody said not to eat kale, and I don't eat raw kale either, but you can roast kale with olive oil, which is a great healthy oil, and salt and pepper, and you make kale chips, and they taste like potato chips. Has anybody ever done it before?
Yeah.
I'll eat the whole tray, like in one sitting, because they're so good. And there are companies that will mass produce them. You can buy them in a bag, but you can just easily make them. Pick them up at the farmer's market in Simpsonville, put your olive oil from Rory, right?
Yep.
And make your kale chips. Okay, so what about organics? There's been reviews of multiple studies that show organic fruits and vegetables have greater levels of vitamin C, iron, magnesium, and phosphorus than non-organic varieties of the same foods. They do have lower nitrates and pesticide residues, and they have greater levels of a number of important antioxidants, all those phytochemicals that we talked about when they study that organic versus non-organic. And then one of the biggest things is that the pesticides and herbicides that are on them can play a role in overall health as well. But there's also obviously some budgetary concerns. So if you can afford it, get organic. If you have to make a choice whether to do that or not, the best way to think about it is if you eat the outside of the fruit or vegetable, then get it organic. If you peel it, then you can do without organic because you're peeling off that outside layer that has all that residue on it. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So there's a list out there. It's called the Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen, which lists out all the Clean 15, the ones you can eat, the Dirty Dozen, the ones you're supposed to get organic. Don't worry about trying to memorize that list because it changes every year. Just go by this if that's the way you want to think about it. Okay, number 4 is you want to emphasize healthy fats and proteins. So I kind of talked about this a little bit already, but fat and protein helps you not to be hungry. And so it helps you to be satiated. And they're also the building blocks and energy sources for metabolic processes. So in particular, one of the things that happens when we do a blood panel on somebody is that they're on a cholesterol medication and their total cholesterol is like 114. And that's very concerning because cholesterol, if you look at the biochemistry, is a building block that helps to make hormones like progesterone, testosterone, and estrogen. And so if you're decreasing your building blocks, you're not going to be able to have a good balance of those hormones. And so we often see people with hormone imbalances because they've got artificially lower levels of cholesterol. And like I said before, cholesterol, yes, blocks the artery, but it only does that when it's attaching to inflammation. So if you can address that inflammation, then it's potentially not as much of a concern. And so here's some examples of healthy fats. And so if you go back to the old pyramid days, these are things that they would tell you to avoid. Salmon is a great source of omega-3 fatty acids. We talked about olives, we've got nuts and seeds. Anybody know what's in that little heart-shaped container up there?
Chia.
Chia seeds, yes, it's chia. You could just sprinkle that on a salad, you don't even know it's there really. You can also make pudding out of chia because when you put it in water, it actually, well, the chia pet, right? It actually expands. It's not going to grow into a plant that quickly, but it expands into this gel-like substance, and you can make puddings out of it. Avocado is a great source of healthy fats as well, and then eggs. That everybody avoids eggs, but especially the yolk. But what nourishes the chick while it's growing inside the egg? The yolk. It's got all that good nutrition in there. So, all right, let's see. Healthy proteins. So beef, chicken, and eggs, and pork. There are different versions out there that you can look at. So beef in particular, you want to make sure that it's hormone-free, no antibiotics, and grass-fed. When they do studies of the grass-fed versus not grass-fed, the grass-fed has higher levels of omega-3 fatty acids, which are anti-inflammatory. And the omega-6s are higher in the non-grass-fed versions of that, which are more inflammatory. Chicken and eggs, pasture-raised, hormone-free, no antibiotics. So pasture-raised, they try to trick you with the wording, so they'll say cage-free. That just means they lifted the cages out of there and they're all still stuck in there like that. So pasture-raised means they're free range and doing what they want to do. And they're typically eating their actual diet, carnivore diet. Ask Steve, he'll tell you that. They eat insects actually, not grains. And then pork, and we talked about this before, the nitrate-free version of that. So, which cow do you want to eat? This one? Or this one?
Right.
Which one do you think is healthier?
The question is, which one are we eating?
Yeah.
Most of the meat that you're eating is here.
That's right.
You have to specifically purchase organic grass-fed beef to be able to get these. This is the standard beef industry on the left. And it's not, and it has a lot to do with hormones. So one of the things that, which do you think, we had that place down the road called Happy Cow, right? Which cows do you think are happier?
The ones on the right.
Ones on the right. Did you say left?
Right.
Oh, okay, I thought you said left. So we all know that we feel better when we're happier, right? It's just and that's all driven by biochemical processes, which means there are different sets of hormones happening in these cows than there are in those cows, independent of what we're actually injecting them with. Over there, because they're living in those conditions, they also have to give them antibiotics and things like that. So these cows are much more healthy, and as a result, the fat that they produce in their beef is more anti-inflammatory with the omega-3s than it is with the omega-6s that you'll find more in those. Despite all of our efforts making good choices, the food supply in general, in some cases, can't supply us in enough quantity some of the things that we just need to be healthy, and so you may have to supplement with some of those things. So, for example, I mentioned earlier resveratrol, you can't drink enough wine or eat enough grapes to get the quantity sufficient to have an effective dose. And so you may need to supplement with some of those things. And this is a study that was done, or an investigation was done by the New York State Attorney General. They went into Walgreens, Target, GNC, and Walmart, and they pulled off common supplements. And they tested to see what was in the bottle, and there were things in the bottle that were not on the label, and the things that were on the label were not in the bottle. And so you need to be very careful about what you're buying off of the shelf. All of the products that we offer in our office are, they're only available at physician's offices, so they're physician grade, which means that They're a little bit more expensive, but that's because the companies have 2 phases where they have independent third-party testing. So all the raw materials coming in are tested to make sure that there's no contamination. And then the products as they go out in the container for retail are tested as well to make sure that what's on the label is in the bottle. And so oftentimes patients, they'll ask, well, can I just get this at the store? You can, but you have to realize that we don't actually know what's in that bottle. And so you think you're saving a couple dollars, but you're actually wasting your money because there's nothing in there to accomplish the goals. Okay, so 5 do's and don'ts. Avoid the added sugar, reduce or eliminate processed carbs, increase your colors, and emphasize healthy fats and proteins. So when people work with us, we help them through help them through this process very aggressively, but you don't need to be aggressive. All you have to do is make one change at a time. And so I've posed some questions to you on your sheet. What's one sugary thing you can remove from your diet? What's one processed carb you can remove? What's one additional color you can add? What's one healthy fat you can add? And what's one anti-inflammatory thing that you can do? And you can do like turmeric, for example, is another anti-inflammatory. And that you can incorporate into your meals as well. Okay, we're out of time, but I'm happy to answer any questions. Yes?
When you talk about sugar, I assume you're talking about sucrose. And what about glucose, honey and fructose?
It all has the same effect, but if you're, on your blood sugar, and your pancreas in terms of producing insulin, but the environment that you're getting the sugar, like honey, is a better option than to do processed sugar, like the raw or the white powder. Yes.
Any sugar that ends in ose turns into a bad sugar eventually.
Yeah, and that's the definition of OSE at the end of the name, is it's a sugar. Yeah.
What about like pH level in the body? What are your thoughts on having acidic versus
So pH level in the blood is very tightly regulated between 7.35 and 4.5, and you have buffer systems that maintain that. So in the blood itself, it doesn't vary, or else you're going to be in a hospital. But in the tissues, it can vary, and more alkaline tissue is more appropriate. I'm not a